All right, another podcast from the Michigan Institute of Athletics in Brighton, Michigan. It's going to be an awesome podcast today. I'm joined with an old friend. Right before we get into it, I want to shout out VetLife. VetLife is a 501c3 nonprofit company. It's a company of veterans for veterans. Every veteran faces difficulties when they transition from active duty back to civilian life, and VetLife is there to ease that transition. If you want to reach out to VetLife, you can do so through Instagram or Facebook, or check out their website at vetlifetoday.org. So without further ado, Dan Spitz, former D1 college football player, UFC fighter, dreamer. You know, there's a lot of titles that would fit you very well, but I want to start this podcast the way that I start all the podcasts. We're not going to talk about the man that you are today yet. We're going to take it all the way back. Let's go all the way back to where you were born and raised, what you were like as a young kid, you know, maybe the things that inspired you, what you thought this life had in store for you, family dynamics, anything that you want. But let's take the listeners to who were you as a young man? What did you think life had in store for you? And then we'll start to craft the story to the man that you are today.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. And let's see, starting off as a kid, I grew up in northern Spokane. So was super close with the family growing up. You know, I went to Catholic school growing up, which was interesting. It was... You develop a very close-knit group of friends there because you were at the same class for 8 years, but it's different than normal school, you know, like
In what ways?
just having everything kind of being around the church and like I guess growing up in like a Catholic environment in the 90s, it wasn't as like I don't want to say like PC, but just stuff was a little more like I guess taboo around there. You didn't necessarily feel like it was the most open environment.
How did that affect you as a kid? Like, because I just went to public school. I had the standard upbringing. Do you feel, I mean, just really describe what was it like in the ways that were maybe positive, and what was it like that made it difficult for you growing up?
Positive wise, I mean, I did develop some pretty close friendships, people that I still have in my life today, which is, you know, hard to find. If you made a friend at like 7 years old, you can still talk to him today. So that was cool. And you kind of could know, like you knew you were a little sheltered back then, which looking back on it, I guess I appreciate. But in the same sense, there was like zero diversity, and you did see a lot of, I wouldn't say necessarily like racism from the church, but you saw a lot of like homophobia and a lot of stuff now that you'd be like, oh, why are people, you know, unsure about this thought process is, yeah, if that makes sense.
So you're in an environment with a lot of conformity. You either subscribed to the ideology that you were being taught, or you probably felt that you stood out in a way that, you know, maybe made you feel ostracized from the belief system. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, definitely. It's a lot of like, grew up with a lot of guilt in that regard, you know, like they make those jokes like Catholic guilt. And so I grew up with a decent amount of that. And I think getting into football at a young age, kind of I got to see a lot more adversity and diversity. And then especially getting into fighting, you know, you meet people that are Buddhist, atheist, Muslim, Catholic, Christian, you know, and I think...
When you said you grew up with guilt, what do you mean?
I don't want this to sound like I'm just trashing on a religion. This is just my experience.
No, this is your life story, man.
I feel like Catholics have a certain way of like, you do this amount of right things and you're allowed to get into heaven. You know, like you get baptized, you get your first Eucharist, then you're allowed to be a part of our group, which I've never necessarily viewed religion as that, you know, like if there is this all-powerful dude up in the air that created all of us, like we should all be good enough, regardless of, you know, what sex we choose to love or what, you know, group of people we hang out with. You know, you should be, yeah, loved regardless. Whereas, you know, like Catholic even has like penance or whatever, you know. So, James, you messed up, but you say 200 Hail Marys and it's gone. So it just kind of, I don't want to say rubbed me the wrong way, but seemed a little closed-minded growing up.
When you say guilt, do you mean like you made actions, and when you look at the standards by which they were telling you had to do things that made you feel less than, and that was the guilt? Do you mean guilt in the way that you viewed other people? You know, I'm just trying to dissect more of, it gave you a negative feeling to some degree, but really what was the source of that? Was it just the narrow-mindedness that you were forced to live with? Was it that you, I don't know, where just if there's anything else that could make you describe for me, like what was the negative feeling associated from?
I guess kind of this idea that there's like this cardinal sin that's going to keep me out of this like amazing afterlife. And then especially growing up, meeting people who, they might not fit that. Because, like homophobia, for example, is a huge, huge thing in the Catholic religion. But it's like you start to meet different people and you're like, oh, that makes no effect on them as a person. Like they are by far better than all these people that I came up with. They just happen to like the same sex. And I think the guilt came from, I guess necessarily like maybe learning about like heaven and hell at a very young age and realizing that like, hey, there's these things that you have to do in order to be good enough to get to this heaven. But we're always going to loom like this idea of a potential hell over your head to keep you in line, which I guess some people need, but I've always viewed religion as like everyone's accepting, love everybody, and obviously like it does give us a framework for what we should and shouldn't do as a person, but I don't think, there are some examples, but like if you mess up, I don't think you should immediately just be like, oh, you're going to hell. It's like, yeah. So that extreme, I think, kind of gave me a negative context.
That makes sense. So you start to grow up in the world, you're in Catholic school. Did you have any dreams for what you were going to do with your life yet? Did you have any aim that you were, hey, I kind of want to be like this? Did you have any role models of people that you were looking up to and that was kind of giving you, like you said, the framework to say, okay, this is what I think I'm going to turn this life into? Or were you kind of just adventuring and seeing what would, come before you?
I was kind of aimless. I kind of like went everywhere at a pretty young age. I kind of figured out football was the thing I wanted to do, like going into my freshman year. But that wasn't necessarily built from like a good place. That was built from like the first coach I had from like 5th grade to 8th grade was, I'm not going to mention his name or anything, but just very shitty person in that regard, would like talk down to me consistently and like, you're never going to play on varsity. You're never going to play as a high schooler. So
why?
Because I was a big kid. I don't know. I kind of had that like, I didn't deal with a lot of like bullies growing up, but like I was the same height as like most of my coaches. So I kind of dealt with the bullying from like adult to kid perspective. If that makes...
No, why do you think that is though? Because in football, being big is a good thing. Like if all of a sudden, if someone walks in this door and they're 6 foot, whatever, or even at the time, whatever they are, they're substantially larger than the other kids. That's a great thing. Like you're probably more likely to be able to be a high level football player. Why would it create a condescending aura? Because you probably stood out in, at least from my perspective as a coach, I'd be like, man, like this might be the guy that could go to the NFL. Look at the natural gifts that he has. Look at his genetics. He has the height. Like the guy that's 5'3", the chances of you playing in the NFL are very small. But you're saying that it was a negative to you, that the coach was the opposite. Can you describe that more?
I knew it probably came from an insecure standpoint, because you are around these kids who like you can tell genetically do have advantages over you, and you may have not made it to that Division I level or that pro level, so you see that, and I think it brings up a lot of wasted opportunity on their end.
So you think the coach was treating you unfairly just because, like insecurity in himself? That's the worst example. If you're a coach, you got to be better than that. That's like a basic requirement, is to look at the person in front of you, and your part in it is almost irrelevant. You have to look at them and see the potential that exists within them and push them to that potential. Maybe they're the one that actually can achieve the dream even though you couldn't. And if you can't deal with that reality, you're not a coach. Or you shouldn't be a coach. You need to get out of the profession, because you give a bad rep for all. That one sports experience could have pushed you away from sports forever, and it probably pushes a lot of people away from sports. They get around a coach that treats them like shit, and next thing you know, they don't want to be involved in that type of environment again. Whereas I'm thinking about it from the opposite perspective. I would look at you, and if you stood out extremely versus the other kids, I'm going, this might be the one. You know what I mean? You have everything that probably is necessary for the recipe for success in football. You can teach someone how to understand the game. You can help them develop their athleticism. You can't give them more height. You can't say, you've got all the other things, now let's just make you 6'6". That doesn't work. It's incredibly unfortunate, because given the right environment and given the right opportunities and the right support system, you probably could have been an NFL player. if you had a great coach by your side. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So you go through that experience. Did that cause any type of depression or any type of, struggles with self-worth or broken confidence? Or did it turn into resentment and anger and then it fueled you in a different direction?
It definitely definitely put a chip on my shoulder, because when I didn't have any of those college scholarships going into like my sophomore year, like I worked so much harder than everybody else. Like I always say, like, yeah, I was given a good body, but if you saw me at like 13 or 14 years old, like I couldn't walk down the hall without tripping over my feet. Like I looked like a Great Dane puppy, basically. It just didn't fit in his body. It was just this, like awkward, gangly kid. But, I did have this dream. And then on top of this dream, I had this old man who never did this dream, but had the audacity to say to like a 10-year-old, like anybody that's going to like talk down to a kid going through it, regardless how big that kid is, like still a kid brain in there, So it did give me a little bit of resentment, but it allowed me to tap into like a much darker place when I work out, which scares some people, but I don't know. Now I know when I'm tired, I'm like, well, I'm tired, but like that guy's still there, like
It's funny that you say that, man. A chip on his shoulder is one of the best motivations in the world if you use it correctly. It's like taking a fire that already existed within you and it's now a raging, inferno. And you go, you think I can't do this, so I'm going to prove to you that I can. I've seen a lot of people with chips on their shoulders do a lot of things, but it can be incredibly self-destructive. And, you've seen that in a lot of great athletes. Like sometimes they start to succeed in one area, but then they completely fumble in all these other areas because they're too dialed in on one thing. So as you progress through high school, you've mentioned now multiple times you had the dream of being the professional football player. How does that come together? Were you balancing the other parts of your life? Were you all in on that aspect? Just continue to walk me through the high school period.
I was, basically like an athlete all through high school. Like I wasn't a terrible student, but I just didn't really care, It was just about like the social life and then the football. And then I figured out I had to get my grades to a certain level to continue the football. So the school kind of, it like, I ended up graduating with like a 3.5, but it wasn't like a real 3.5. It was like we found this website that was allowed to do online classes. So I retook 4 years of English and a year of math in like a calendar week. And yeah, so it was a nice loophole, but so I basically just made it through high school to get to the college level.
So you're getting done with high school. You get into college football.
Mm-hmm.
The dream's still alive. And now you're really like, college football is kind of where you're going to make it or not. You know what I mean? You need to get scouted. You need to stand out. You need to prove to yourself you can hang with those people. And, your coaches and the people around you that like, I belong here and maybe I'm even destined for a greater level. Start to walk me through the college experience. What college did you go to, et cetera?
So I had 41 Division I scholarship offers. That was kind of my big like middle finger to that coach. I was like, hey.
As you just said that out loud, my brain actually thought the exact same thing. Talk about an ultimate slap in the face to that man that said you weren't enough, because all of a sudden here you are with all these college opportunities that, he probably could have never dreamed of in his life. And it's your reality now. But the chip probably still exists.
Oh, yeah. It was still there. But it was a big adjustment, going from just like high school where it's like, all right, you go to school, you work out, you practice, and then you're done, to like a 80+ hour a week full-time job where you also have to get class in. Like I always joke to people, because this was before NIL, to where they were really teaching or treating athletes like people. I always joke like, yeah, I majored in football but got a degree while I was there, because your entire schedule is built around football. And yeah, they make it sound good with like student athlete, but you just look at dollars. Like the fact that you're a student doesn't really bring money in. The fact that you're an athlete brings all the money in. So it was an adjustment. I want to say I had to grow up, but I didn't really have to grow up. Everything you do there is so like, you're just on this track, and it's pretty hard unless you really, really mess up. It's pretty hard to get off that track. So did that.
What college, by the way?
Washington State University. Yeah. So I played defense for the first 2 years, and I had a pretty major shoulder surgery. I switched to offensive line just because I have the body type of a lineman. They're basically like me, but like 330 pounds and, can dunk a basketball and very, very freak athletes. Did that, and going into my senior year, I had to get a bone graft out of my hip and get like a cyst removed from my foot because they thought it was bone cancer. It was this whole fun thing. If you've never broken your hip before, it is incredibly painful. So they sent me home. And I basically, for about a month and a half, I was so just drugged up from the surgery, I don't really remember it. And so coming back from that and then getting thrown into like a leadership position was a lot mentally because we went from having Paul Wolf, who's this super good, like really cares about his players, was our coach for 4 years. And then we switched to like this more fancy, like high end coach with Mike Leach, who is a good coach, like X's and O's, but not necessarily that like attached to his players. Kind of treats it more like an NFL program, which works for him, but it's a big adjustment. So getting thrown into that, yeah, it was a lot of pressure, being put into a captain's role and then just, I want to say I burnt out with football, but it's a combination of stuff, like you've talked about depression on here before. It was definitely a combination of some situational things that were going on and just chemical imbalance in my brain. Because going into my senior year, I had just come back from that surgery. It was very like, I don't know, I went through a hard breakup that summer too. So I try and like overanalyze stuff like that, So I was going through it pretty bad through like most start of the season. But from the outside looking in, like my life was great. I was captain of college football program, I was talking to the Dolphins, I was talking to the Jaguars, like dreams really coming true, man. But so we played Eastern, my second game of the year. And then it was like a close game, but it's the best game I had played. And went out and like partied that night, but I still didn't feel myself. So went home that Sunday, kind of like, I guess, wrote out my final thoughts, I guess, and threw it away, went to sleep. And then on that Monday, I basically just texted my coach, like, hey, I'm done. Like, it was cryptic. Like, basically, I didn't want to be alive anymore. So I went to the store. I got 3 bottles of Robitussin and a bottle of Tylenol PM. So I texted him basically like, hey, like, I'm done. So I, like, took all of it. He could tell something was up. So he came in, got me from my apartment, drove me to the hospital. The rest past there is pretty blurry, but it's just a hard situation. It was, yeah.
If you're willing to, let's look back at that because from the outside looking in, which is exactly what you said, everything's going right, man. The young kid that had the dream's coming true. You're a captain at Washington State. You're having discussions with NFL teams. That is the ultimate goal of so many young children. That could I be that professional athlete? You're on the verge of that. You're right there. Your dream's in front of you, but you were broken mentally. Mm-hmm. Can you really dissect why? Like the man that sits here today, you probably have such, deeper understanding of life and you and what it takes to be happy and how to deal with stress and trauma and all these different things. But what was it that had you so broken that you weren't able to say, despite all this pain, despite all this adversity, like there's a lot of light right in front of me. And if I can endure, I can live the dream that I set out to as a kid. Can you go back into that darkness period and try to figure out why were you as broken as you were? What were the things that were really crippling you?
Chemically, I was off in my brain, and there's a multitude of things that can attribute for that. I personally attribute, honestly, the amount of pain meds and stuff I was taking. Like, after such an intense surgery and that whole rehabilitation process, and then you add, like, a breakup on top of that, because it was, like, circumstantial. It wasn't like, I don't like you anymore, or she doesn't like me anymore. It's like, she's moving to another country. So, just, just doesn't really make sense and just kind of sucks. So that on top of, like, I dealt with a similar thing in fighting, but when you put your whole identity into just a sport, and then there's that, like, whether it's depression or anxiety that kind of trickles out, like, well, what am I without this? You know, like, if I've just been a football player and this has gotten me all my attention and all of my self-worth for such a long time, like, what am I without this? So that started to trickle in, and I don't know, dealing with that type of depression is weird because you almost feel like, best analogy I've had is like you're in a sauna, you know? It's like when you're cutting weight, and it's like you can't think of anything else other than like getting out of that sauna. So like I couldn't really see all the good around me, you know, because I'm so focused like 3 inches in front of my face.
That's huge. That's such a big way to consider it. I mean, it's like, despite all the darkness, just sitting on the outside in, I can see so much light in that part of your story, but it doesn't matter if you don't see it. If the perspective that you're looking through only sees the difficulty and the darkness and the pain, all of a sudden that light doesn't matter. And you see that with depressed people a lot. From the outside looking in, you go, look at all of these things you have that you could still celebrate, and you could realize that like you have such a valuable life still, and it's worth fighting for, and it's worth going on and enduring despite the pain right now. Despite how terrible it is circumstantially, doesn't mean that you can't make a dream come true. You won't be someone's husband one day. You won't have children that go, my dad made it to the NFL. Like, we have limited perspectives, especially when we're young. You just haven't endured as much. When you've gone through more, it like takes way more to rock you. Mm-hmm. Like at this period of our life, we've been through enough darkness that it would take a tidal wave of pain and difficulty and struggle to even really rock our boat. It's almost like you just learn how to adapt. If you're looking to pass lessons on to the next generation, there's going to be countless other people exactly like you in those moments. If you were your own therapist and you could go back in time and talk to that young Dan, the kid that was going through the breakup, you just come through that surgery, you're dealing with all these things, is there any advice you could give him with your perspective you have now? Is there anything that you could maybe say to yourself that might have taken a little bit of the edge off? Is there any way you could have made the perspective a little bit more beautiful?
Yeah, I think there's a multitude. I would tell myself like the real outcomes of like suicide and those types of, because if you're really thinking about it, there's two outcomes that are going to happen, right? You're either going to be successful, you're going to leave this giant wake of people that did love you, but you were so blinded you couldn't see it. You're going to ruin lives, which nobody wants to make you feel selfish when you're already feeling suicidal, but you really are. You're selfishly leaving your life in a wake. And then the second one is, which I've gone through, people distance themselves from you, and it's not going to make sense, right? So if you're severely depressed, you're suicidal, all you want is to know that everyone loves you. And a lot of the times, depending on how anxious you are, you need to know that all the time. But it's common when people deal with death or people deal with like trauma, or let's say like you have somebody really close to you dealing with cancer, like it's pretty common to like distance yourself near the end. It's supposed to just make things easier. So on one end, you're gone. On the other end, you're going to lose people close to you. So it's like, those are your two real options. Neither solve the problem. Like, one solves it permanently, but doesn't need a permanent solution. The other one kind of just made your life shittier. So I'd lay that out. And then also remind you, like, it's just one day, like, just don't kill yourself today. And then try again tomorrow. It's like, I had no idea, like, looking back, I was 22 at the time. I had no idea the amount of random stuff I do in those, 11 years. Like, yeah. So just reminding people, like, look, it is a gift. We're getting to that age now, unfortunately, where we see people that really didn't want to die. They'll get hit with cancer or, an accident or something like that. So it's like really letting them know, like, hey, there's nothing pretty about it. Like, you imagine, like, oh, I made it. Now everybody's going to love me and all these people are going to be supportive and close. Like, no. Like, you hopefully make it, right? And statistically, if you're a man and you're thinking about that, there's not a good chance you will. And then if you do make it, like, it's going to be fucking lonely. Like, getting out of that it's going to be significantly harder than just talking to someone before. So, yeah.
There's something to be said about the idea that you're alluding to, that it's also not over till it's over. Like, imagine how much beauty you have had in your life since that moment, that if you would have taken your own life, you would have never experienced any of that. Imagine the relationships that you would have missed out on, the experiences, the, just genuine interactions you've had with family and strangers and friends and new relationships, that none of that could have existed if you would have ended things. And it's like, no matter how dark it is now, it's like, to that old cliche quote, like, it's darkest before the dawn a lot of times. And you don't see that initially. It feels like the night is going to be never ending. It's going to stay dark forever. And I've been to that point. I've been to the point where some people have talked to me like, how did you get through, the worst times of your life? It wasn't at all on positive emotion. It wasn't at all on like, oh, I believe it'll be better in my future. I hope that things work out. Honestly, it was a lot of like anger and like, I don't know, more of like the chip on your shoulder, just something about me refusing to give in to the pain and let it defeat me permanently. It wasn't this beautiful like redemption arc. You know what I mean? And like, that's what a lot of people have to understand too. It can be a completely different source for you that helps you pick yourself off the floor. You just have to keep going. And time heals things more than you can understand until the time has passed. Because when you're in the heat of the pain and the difficulty and, like the trauma that is just so overwhelming that you think like, there's just no way I can get through this. You're more than what you think you are. And you realize that over time. It's like the 22-year-old version of you could never believe the actual difficulty that you can endure. And the fact that it can produce a version of you that's worlds beyond the current in resiliency, in character, in the ability to help others. One thing that going through darkness does is it opens you up to being a tremendous ambassador on behalf of people that are struggling, because you've been there. They can see it and feel it in your words. When you've been through darkness too, you connect to people that are in darkness. And they go, man, like if he kept fighting and he kept going, maybe I can too. So like it's weird because way later on, there's a lot of beauty that can be pulled from the dark, from the worst moments of your life. You just don't understand that when you're in them. You know what I mean? You just have to keep going. So how did you eventually start digging your way out, man? Because you had a major arc up. You have all your dreams coming true. That's a blessing and a curse. It comes with tremendous pressure. It comes with all these other things that you don't understand until you get there. It sounds like it's going to be this all like, my life's going to be great and I'm going to have endless relationships and everybody's going to love me. No. It's like climbing a mountain. Like the air gets thinner the higher you go because you're less relatable to people and you're different than them and you won't fit in with the normal crowd. And if you're desperate to just be loved by everybody around you, you might not get any of that, which might send you tumbling back down the hill. What was it, though, that when you fell from that height and you hit your absolute rock bottom that got you to keep going forward? Or was there any spark that really you remember in your story where you took a noticeable step up? Like from the broken, defeated Dan, you did something that was like, hey, maybe there is light at the end of this tunnel. Maybe I can get past this period. Do you remember anything in particular?
There wasn't a specific moment really where I like got myself back so that happened. That was September 10th, 2012. And then I went home for the rest of the semester and just kind of like, which was hard because you have to like watch all your teammates play each week and then watch how it's affecting your family. And like I said, that lonely part, like that was a very lonely time. But, coming back, getting my degree, as much as I joke that I have a degree in football, but I do have a degree in psychology and a minor in business. And so going back, doing that was helpful. But honestly, I took all of my anger out from like not making it where I wanted to go in football into fighting. And I fought like 3 weeks, my first amateur fight after I graduated. And
let's take a step back. How did you get involved in fighting? You're a college football player. MMA was probably on your radar, but what made you take the first class? Where was your first class? What was the first spark you got of MMA?
So I wrestled from the time I was 5 to 15. So I have a background in like combat sports. And I had to stop in high school because I had some shoulder issues. But I've been a UFC fan for a while. Like, I haven't missed a pay-per-view since UFC 32. So I want to say it was Rizzo and Randy Couture, Pedro Rizzo and Randy Couture, like the old school. So I've always a fan, and I still had that drive to compete. So it was like one of the last weeks I was in town, ready to go back to school. The Ultimate Fighter Live was about to show up. So like Michael Chiesa and Sam Cecilia were on it. So I Googled the gym that they went to, and it was Sick Jitsu. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll try this out. So I did a week of that before I went back and was just hooked. And yeah, that was my first experience at a gym. And came back, had like 3 weeks of training, took my first amateur fight, won by knockout, took my second one 2 weeks later and won by knockout. And I was like, oh, all right, like, I like this.
Man, that's incredible. And those guys are both legends of the Spokane area. You know what I mean? So it had to be so cool. I remember the Ultimate Fighter Live, and you're seeing, Chiesa and Cecilia, and these aren't, like, so many times people cannot identify with their idols enough that makes them realize that they can be like that. They see the elite level businessman or fighter or football player or whatever it is for you. But there's such a separation from the people that they are, from those people, that instead of believing that they could do that too, they're just like, wow, that person's incredible. They put them on a pedestal, and they don't realize, like, that's just another young man that's like chasing his dream and pouring his energy into that area, and it's working out for him up to this point. I mean, they're already killing it. They're on the Ultimate Fighter. They're right at the precipice of the major leagues. I mean, really, they are in the major leagues if you're at the Ultimate Fighter level. But you, being the college football player, the guy that wrestled for 10 years, the genetic specimen, you were probably able to be like, I can be like that. And that's a huge doorway to open. And then I would imagine that sparked that flame again in your chest, because for a while you had football. You had something that you were able to work towards. As soon as you started fighting, like, do you remember that your first fight in particular and getting that knockout and getting your hand raised? Did you have that same victorious feeling like when you succeeded on in the football field?
Yeah, you definitely walk with, you walk a little bigger, and yeah, it felt good. And I knew in fighting, it's like I bring it back to Michael Strahan. He's like one of my favorite football players growing up. He plays D end for the Giants, for non-football players out there. But he had a quote where he's like, somebody asked him, how did you make it to X amount of Pro Bowls and 2 Super Bowl rings? And he's like, well, I was just willing to do the stuff other people weren't. So I was like, hey, I am athletic. I am very large for an heavyweight. Like, I know that I can put in more effort, more time than people. So that all kind of clicked for me with fighting. And after you get your first knockout, it's like, oh, okay, like this is gonna work.
That's what I mean. That's something that's huge. If you can build yourself as a man or woman from your childhood into your adolescence, into your adult life, where you develop skills, you build your confidence, you put yourself in a diverse setting, and you find that you have a lot of potential in a lot of different areas. And now maybe you've only gone 10% of your potential or 5% of your potential in those areas. But what you're doing is you're laying out ingredients. And what can happen in life is you can find a recipe for success. And if you have the proper ingredients, you knew you had the work ethic, you knew you had the character, you knew you had the passion, you knew you had the drive. So then you just look at a new recipe and say, this is what it would take to succeed in this. And I know that I have these things. That's something I try to tell young kids a lot that I mentor, is like, you don't know how the dots are going to line up in your future. Your job is to prove to yourself that you are much more than what you realize. You are far more capable than you realize, and this life has a lot to offer you if you're willing to put yourself out there and go all in. And if you do that consistently, what happens is you become a higher level human being. You have all of these skills and self-belief. And if you have skills and self-belief and get in a positive environment around the right people, you don't even have the slightest idea for what you could do in this life. And that's what I'm hearing in your story. Things kind of lined up in a way that it was like, there's a door here, and I think I can walk through it. But then you said you go back off to college. Kind of walk me through the end of your college career, and then the progress through your mixed martial arts, because for the people that don't know, that are just listening to the story, you made it to the UFC. You got to the pinnacle. You got to the NFL's version for MMA is the UFC. So walk me through that part of your story.
My last semester was, honestly, it felt kind of boring. So it's the first time I didn't have like 60 hours a week of football stuff scheduled. So It was kind of fun. I was just a normal student, and yeah, I went to class and social on the weekends, and yeah, I was kind of bored.
Did you struggle at all? A lot of the times I find people that are incredibly competitive or that have a lot of fire that you obviously do, a lot of those people struggle with addiction, with drugs, with alcohol, with partying, with hedonistic pleasure, with all these different things because I can't really describe it to people that are not this way, but when you're competitive, you just want to dominate at everything. You want to be a winner. If you're going to drink, you're going to drink more than everybody else.
Drink the most.
I don't know why that is, but it runs hand in hand. Like Joe Rogan is a lot of times reference like greatness and madness kind of walk a close line because you're just wired differently than normal people. And you don't really fit in with some people that might just be able to, go extreme on a weekend with partying, then can just go about their normal life for the next 4 weeks with nothing. A lot of people like you, they're extremists, and extremists can fall into traps and they can fall into, things that they don't really want to fall into, but they don't have the foresight to see like, oh, maybe I shouldn't go as extreme in this area of my life because it might cause setbacks. Did you struggle with any of those things?
Coming out of college, not so much. I'd burned the candle at both ends. And when you're in your 20s, it doesn't really seem like that big of a deal. And I was always like, if I went out on Saturday, I have to make sure I work on Sunday, like work harder on Sunday. So I kind of had that mindset.
How did you have the discipline to do that?
I just really enjoyed football. And I really enjoyed, after that I had training. So I wanted to train. So I was like, all right, well, do you want to be hungover for the day or you just want to like work it out in training? And yeah, none of that really became a problem until I quit fighting. Then alcohol became a bit of an issue.
So let's work our way through your MMA story then, because you go out there, you get your knockout, you start winning some fights. When does it really start, becoming like this is a career path and maybe I have a chance to be like Mike and Sam? And you're probably training with them every day. And what was that like, knowing that like the two guys that are right next to you, that you get to make like your role models, they're succeeding. That gives you a different energy. It's not like people out there are making their dreams come true. It's like, no, the boys that I just did rounds with, they're crushing it. And like Sam and Mike are some of the best human beings I've personally met in this sport. I've met thousands of people, but like here's what I'll say about them. They're just like the boys. They're like who you would want to have as a friend that's just down to earth. They're going to grind. They don't ask for handouts. They're going to earn what they achieve in this life. And like those are the people that are the most relatable. Those are the people that you take the most inspiration from because you can see how what they do and who they are yields the results that they produce. What was that story like? What was it like training alongside them? Talk about your pro career. How quickly did it come together for you? Did it come together too quick, etc.?
Yeah. Well, obviously having Mike and Sam was a huge gift in that sport because, from I'm pretty sure my first amateur fight, they were both signed to the UFC. So the entire time I'm coming up, I have these guys just doing already what I'm trying to do. And not to like bash on them at all, but they don't have any like college level wrestling or college level, sports. Like, yeah, they're athletic, but it also showed me like, hey, like if you just work hard, you can get here. Here's two guys with just blue collar background that are doing it. As for my amateur career, I was an amateur for about 2 years. Yeah, I had 8 amateur fights. Fought a really tough guy up in Battlefield. It's like a Canadian organization over on the West Coast, and that kind of showed me that I gotta get a boxing coach. And it was one of those good losses, like needed one loss in my amateur career, and then needed one loss in my pro career to teach me to start training with heavyweights. And yeah, so I was an amateur for about 2 years. My first pro fight was against Matt Kovacs, who had, I think, 34 pro fights at the time. Yeah, it was kind of a mismatch, if you will, for a debut opponent, but I wasn't overly worried about it. I mean, he's athletic and a boxer, but like I said, I've wrestled for a long time. I arm triangled him in 2 minutes. So
I can't believe the commission sanctioned that. That would never happen in Michigan or most of the states. They would never allow that. But Washington must have been real laid back in their sanctioning at that time.
Yeah, those reservations, they're a little loosey-goosey with that.
So you win your pro debut. how quickly do you decide you're going to fight again? How quickly does your success come to you? And then when's like your big break?
I had 2 fights past that, which were kind of just like local guys, like weren't that big of a test. And then my fourth fight, I fought Wesley Cabbage Carrera, who's like a former UFC title contender, and they brought me out to Hawaii, and I was like the guy that's supposed to lose because he was back with Jackson's camp and was supposed to, he wins this fight, he's back in the UFC. So I beat him in a 3-round war, which I'm really grateful I've had because up to that point, everybody I'd hit would like go down, and I had Cabbage up against the cage and started this combination off with a knee and then probably hit him like 7 or 8 more times. And he just like looked at me and smiled. And I was like, all right, well, I guess this is going all 15 minutes,
That's what he was known
everything
for.
I had.
I remember his whole career in the UFC. Cabbage would take the biggest shots from the most dangerous guys, and he wouldn't even show a reaction. It was like, this guy doesn't have the same wiring as everyone else. I remember his career. So I didn't know you fought him. That's amazing. In Hawaii.
Yeah.
Jesus.
I was like punching a kettlebell. His head was so hard. I joke, and it's always one of the things that frustrates me most about like action movies, how they'll beat up 6 people and then just like type on a computer or just like write with a pen. It's like, dude, after the Cabbage fight, I couldn't even sign for my money. Like I couldn't hold a pen. I was like, I won the fight. I barely got hit, So I beat him. That got me to 4-0. And then I fought, his name's Colton Vaughn. He was like the top heavyweight at the time in Idaho. So I fought him at King of the Cage. That was a 7-second knockout. And then I was supposed to have my 6th pro fight on King of the Cage, but I got called that week to replace Todd Duffy for my first UFC fight, which Amanda fought Cynthia Calvillo, I believe.
Oh, I had no idea you were on that same.
We were both at the same.
What? Yes, that was like her 2nd or 3rd UFC fight. Wow.
Yeah. So I got that call on a week's notice. Had to do the whole like whirlwind of UFC stuff. When you're like your first fight, you have to do all the different like media, and yeah, it was just a.
Was it overwhelming? Did you feel you belonged? You're like, you know what, this is where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah, I felt like I belonged there. It was a lot to take in though. Going from like little Worley, Idaho, which is a cool, like King of the Cage is a cool promotion, and it's this tiny little casino, and to being like, all right, well, you're staying at the New York, you're fighting in this arena that we've never had a promotion at before, but this is where our professional hockey team's gonna play, and yeah, so it was a lot. And the amount of stuff they make you do, like through a fight week. I finally got to the fight and I was like, I'm exhausted. But
who was your debut against?
Mark Godbeer.
Oh, I remember that. I do remember this fight now. The second you just said that, it popped back in my head. I do remember that.
Yeah. It's pretty back and forth. I mean,
yeah, it was a great fight.
Yeah, I got tired. But, I mean, I had never trained with Josh before this. The biggest guy I would train with was Mike when he was, 200 pounds. So really taught me to, like, hey, as a heavyweight, you have to know how tiring it's going to be to have other heavyweights on you.
So now walk me through your UFC career, not just your fights. I mean, I know, like, you can talk about the fights as much as you want, but your life at that point. Because now you're in the UFC, man. You're in a global organization. You are a celebrity to a lot of people. You've achieved an incredible level of success, but still the mind has to be in the right place, or it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter that you're a UFC fighter. You could still struggle with depression. You could still be sad all the time. You could still have broken pieces of the rest of your life that are making you feel less than, instead of being able to enjoy, like, man, I'm in the UFC. Like, I get to go fight and be passionate and get a big paycheck and show all those young kids with a dream that, like, it's possible. But if you're not in the right headspace, none of that, it doesn't feel like that. Mm-hmm. So walk me through that time of your life.
Yeah, I was a little bummed out after the Godbeer fight. Because, like, I text Ruby and I was like, all right, we're going to get another one booked in 8 weeks and, I'll be ready for that one. And then you don't realize, like, it's a giant company and you get your fights when you get them and they're required to offer you X amount. And, yeah, so I kind of just went from, like, this super high to, like, all right, I'm back in Spokane. I'm all beat up and I don't have a fight booked. And, I just quit my part-time job because I got this full-time job. So there's kind of like it's a big worry because no one ever thinks they're going to, like, lose their debut, and you don't plan for that. You plan for knocking this dude out and then, planning this fight. And, yeah, so It was a lull, but I never felt like I like made it to the UFC until I got my first win. My second fight was Anthony Hamilton. I was out in Pittsburgh, and I was able to, bring Josh in, actually have a few heavyweights in there. So felt really ready for that fight. I knocked him out in 24 seconds, 25 seconds. Yeah. She was good, though. It felt nice to, like, so I noticed he always leaned over. Like, he leaned forward when he threw his right hand. So we planned it was either going to be, like, a slip right or a knee. And, yeah, I knocked him out with the right. And that's when it actually felt real. I was like, oh, like, I'm in the UFC now. And
Did you get the performance bonus from that?
no, Uriah Hall got it, but
28-second knockout, you don't get a performance bonus? Because I was thinking at that point, now you go home with 80 grand, your life has changed dramatically.
yeah. And I mean, yes, his knockout was nice. It was back and forth, but I didn't get punched once. Okay, there should be.
I remember the fight. It was literally you starched a heavyweight to his face with a right hand. I remember the fight.
Yeah. But I mean, Dana always takes care of people, So he still spoiled me. I went home happy, but so did that. Unfortunately, I broke my thumb in that fight, so I had to get pins put in there. So I was in the UFC for like 3.5 years and only fought 4 times. I had that injury, which was.
But like you beat Hamilton, you go back home. How are you as a man? How are you as a friend? How are you mentally? How are your relationships? What was your life like when you get that first win? Because, I mean, that's a big sense of like, hey, I've kind of made it. Now I need to maintain it. But what was your life like?
Definitely confident. Yeah, a lot more confident. But I didn't really try and change anything, Like, I've never really I guess, competing at a very high level from a super young age, like, I don't ever feel special, Like, yeah, I worked really hard to do this one thing, and I do it pretty well, but I don't know, nothing really changed back home.
Do you have a girlfriend at the time? Do you have families in good...
Relationships were hard to, at least for me personally, they were hard to manage during fighting.
Why?
A lot of women don't like either finding out that they're not like your main priority, or like you have to tell them early on, like, hey, like my job is incredibly dangerous and I have to focus on it for this set amount of time or I could get hurt. It was hard to manage that for me. And like I did try like one relationship, but it just caused way more problems than it ever really solved.
It sucks to hear that, because just being a coach for as long as I have been, the people that I see that are able to maintain high levels of success for a sustained period of time, they have like an incredibly supportive partner by their side. And it's not just their gym. Like their coach has to be supportive. Their gym has to be in a good place. Like you need a lot of pieces to add up. And I've seen people make it that are just single and like do their own thing. But really the people that I see that just transcend their level over and over again, they have like a rock solid support by their side, because you're going to go through rough patches. You're going to go through either losses, or even if it's not losses, you're going to go through, what about injuries? What about setbacks? There's all kind of things that life can pop up. A close loved one dies. And like having that support, the reason I keep asking about it is having that person by your side. It is an invaluable resource. And I don't want to look at it like it's not like, oh, you're a resource, you're an accessory. But no, it's just it provides a foundation that makes you a lot harder to break down. It's like even if you take a loss in that ring, if you got someone to come home to that loves you, that cares about you, says, hey, dust yourself off, pick yourself back up, and like you're crushing it. I'm proud of you. You're living the dream. It's like one thing if you reference Conor McGregor. Look at the woman that he had by his side while he's living in a 1-bedroom apartment on welfare as a plumber's assistant, saying, I'm going to be the first person from Ireland to do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to become UFC world champion. I'm going to be... That sounds like delusional talk. That sounds like the person that's just making all these outrageous claims that won't achieve a fraction of them. But yet, by having a rock-solid support by his side with someone that loved him and believed in him, and a great gym, and all of the characteristics that he brought to the table, he transcends the sport, becomes a 2-division world champion, makes more money than anyone could ever dream of. I believe that the woman by his side was a pivotal part of that. Do you break down and analyze the story in the same way? Do you think that part, now that you can look back, would have helped you through maybe some of the struggles, but if you had found the right person by your side?
Yeah, 100%. Definitely would have. I mean, it would have been a lot nicer to just have somebody, either bounce ideas off of, or yeah, after a loss, it's fucking lonely to lose, man. It's especially lonely losing in the UFC. People remind you that they bet on your fights, and just a
The
bunch of
internet
stuff.
is violent too.
Yeah, the
Like,
internet is undefeated, man.
the messages you get, the posts that you see, if you're not in a really good place psychologically, it is like some of the messages I've seen about what people have said about Josh Parisian after, a loss. It's like, man, they don't consider their actions long term, and they're probably just, whatever. They think they can throw hate and it doesn't mean anything. Those messages resonate with people. That can live in your head what someone said about you if you're not in the right place mentally. And it's like you'd almost want to go up to they're probably, not to stereotype, but they're working jobs that they're not that fulfilled in. They don't have their life in order. They're not in a place where they feel so fulfilled, because I don't see fulfilled, happy people tearing others down. It's so rare. It's like, imagine I just come up to your job and start shitting on you about this, that, or the other thing, or, pointing out all the losses you're taking in your life because you're not trying to do anything substantial. But you guys have to deal with that. And a lot of people on the outside, they don't see that. They see the glory. They see the success. They see the titles. You're a UFC fighter. You're this. They see maybe a good paycheck you made. But there is a double edge to that sword that is brutal. And if you're not in a good place psychologically, it can torment you. So let's go through stages of your UFC career, best moments, worst moments, and then as you get to the end of your UFC career, transitions in life are often some of the most difficult, darkest periods for people. When your identity is shifting, or that chapter of your story is going to close, and now you're back to like, who's Dan without fighting? And that's a dark question to ask yourself. If you're not in a good place psychologically, you might not have the answers readily available. They are there. But if they're not readily available, you can sink into some dark places. So just walk me through that part of your story.
Yeah. Well, mentally, I was all over the place in my last fight camp. Like, I'm grateful I did it, but a big reason, I went through a big bout of depression after the Walt Harris fight, just dealing with another injury, and I was in just a toxic relationship, and just, yeah. So I was like, all right, well, you're going to get back to it. You're going to show people that you can fight again, win or loss, you've done that, you've told your story, and you've gone out. So did that. I was pretty bummed out after the loss, naturally, I kind of lucked out because, the woman I ended up dating for, a decent amount of time, I met her, a month or two after that fight. So it wasn't really a lull where I was really alone. But also that put way too much pressure on her through the relationship, because she's like, oh, well, he has no direction and no vision. And so trying to explain, hey, I've never had this kind of relationship before. I'm going to figure everything else out, but I can understand, this is a lot. But also, I want to have this. So it helped. It was kind of like putting a Band-Aid over something that eventually had to come off. And yeah, so it was nice just to just work a job and, think that I was starting a family, and, thought I was I don't know, the idea of comfort and being normal in that sense has been very appealing to me. Just with the super chaotic kind of upbringing and life choices that, yeah.
So you've almost experienced a shift where instead of being under the bright lights and having to work for this, seemingly unattainable goal and constantly chase the new version of yourself and perfection at a higher level, you went through a shift where you're just seeking some peace for a little bit. And maybe that's to counterbalance the years of redlining yourself and pushing yourself to the absolute maximum. Your brain just hey, can I just have some peace? Can I just sit down and feel good about being alive and who I am and not have to be striving for the next win to find my happiness? How has that gone?
It's good. But again, it's another one of those double-edged swords, because I understand how I'm wired. I understand that I am in that top 0.1% of achievers. So if I just look for peace, then I end up anxious as hell, and mind will be going in 100 different ways. So the approach I've recently tried to tried to use. I was looking for a different word there. I don't try and I'm not striving to be happy. I'm not striving to be peaceful. I'm striving to be a hard worker. I'm striving to accomplish my goals. I'm striving to be better than I was yesterday. And that peace and happiness is going to be a byproduct of that. But I find it, I don't want to say selfish, but a little selfish if you're just going through life for the sole intent of being happy or being peaceful. So it's like, well, what gift are you inhibiting because you're so worried about being happy that you're hiding that from the world. I don't necessarily want to talk about mental health all the time, but if someone brings it up to me, then I feel like I do have a responsibility. So, yeah, just not pursuing being peaceful and happy has kind of given me that.
It's bizarre that you say that, but it's funny. I recently just taught an 8-week course with a friend of mine who's very successful. And one of the things I really tried to lay out for people is most times, having been a coach for as long as I have, I've witnessed people go through extreme struggle. I've witnessed them set incredible goals. I've witnessed them have setbacks. You know what it is? I've got to see such a beautiful perspective of life, of extreme struggle, extreme success. I've seen peaks. I've seen valleys, and I've seen how people bounce back from adversity. So it's given me a very broad perspective at what actually creates happiness for people. And I was trying to lay out for people that exactly what you just said, you're not really seeking happiness because that's a dead end. Happiness, it eludes you. If you try to grab it, it's gone. And you're like, I thought it was right here. I thought it existed in this moment. If I felt tired, so I thought if I just sat down and did nothing, that's what would be my happiness. And maybe that's a bad example, but what I found is when you strive for things that matter to you, that align with who you are at the core, that match your morality or your values or whatever it is, the man you want to be in this life, if you seek being that person, happiness is a byproduct. You're not chasing happiness. You're chasing something almost bigger than that. And during the ascent towards something that you deem worthy, happiness and fulfillment come out of it. We've almost got to the point in the society where we think of happiness as comfort or contentment or momentary feeling. Like if I feel this right now, that must be happiness. And I don't think that's accurate. I think happiness comes from moving forward through life in a way that you're proud of. Becoming a man that you are proud of, serving the world in a way that you make a difference, that you bring some light and beauty into the lives of others. And if you do those things for a sustained period, for a long enough time, happiness just shows up. It's like when you're not trying to grab it, next thing you're like, wait, is this it? Is this what I've been searching for? I thought I had to chase it. And anecdotally, that's what's happened in my life, is by striving to be the man that I value and looking at my shortcomings and analyzing my mistakes and looking inward a lot and setting my life in a direction, like taking all of these pieces to a complex puzzle and creating a map. It's like I have a GPS, and if I follow that GPS, I'm happy. I'm fulfilled. I'm able to live very freely. I have a very light feeling. I'm excited for what each day brings instead of paralyzed by the fears of what should have been or could have been. And that's the secret. If I had to sit down with people and try to help them put their life in order, you contain within you the roadmap for your own happiness. But you have to find a way to get yourself to pursue things bigger than what's right in front of your face. Or you can be misled easily. Happiness might seem like it lies in a bottle. Happiness may lie in as long as I can see this person or be with this person, I'll be happy. That's not how it works. It comes from a bigger source of fulfillment. Does that make sense to you?
100%. Accepting that all of those, like you're saying, through a person or through a substance, it's all fugazi. It's not really there. And that's one of the issues. I'd be pretty honest. I had a pretty bad drinking issue. As soon as I got out of that relationship I was telling you about, we lived together, and I thought I had it under wraps in that because I was running a lot, but it got to a point where I was drinking a fifth a day. It was just, in a really bad place. But it's for the same reason. It gave me that, like, I would drink and I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm gonna make a comeback and I'm gonna do X, Y, and Z, and I'd plan it all out. And it's like, no, dude, that was the alcohol talking. Like, yeah, you did kind of have this version of temporary happiness right there, but none of it was real.
So how did you get out of that, Dan? And was that real? Like, is that a part of your soul that was able to speak through the alcohol when you get rid of all the excess layers and all the problems in your life and all the setbacks and all the pain and all the difficulty? Is that your soul still saying, like, hey, if you pursued this, you would be happy? And then you just didn't have the tools and the ability or the environments or the people or whatever missing ingredients it was to get to be that man. Maybe, was that it? Or, no, was that it? And then if not, what made you recognize that what I'm doing is incredibly destructive and flip a switch?
Honestly, I think it made me recognize it. I went out lifting. I went to work out with my dad one day, and I like got on the scale, and I was like 298. I was just like, oh, like I knew I'd let myself go for a little while, but I was like, okay. So I always joke like my body dysmorphia combated my alcoholism, but no, I had to like taper off because did get to a point where like if I would have just stopped, I could have died. So I slowly drank less and less, and then went to kind of like a rehab. Yeah, it was a psych ward, wasn't really rehab, but I don't know if it was real. I think it was just alcohol would bring up like the last real like moment I thought I had of like joy, and that just came from an accomplishment. Whereas, so I think my overall view on everything was pretty skewed and messed up. It was like we were talking about, like the joy isn't necessarily from like the accomplishment. Like the joy is the steps you took to that accomplishment.
There's my favorite Les Brown quote of all time says, what you become in the process is more important than the dream. And that's what you're speaking to. No, it wasn't the UFC victory. It was the man that you are that allowed you to get to that level. It was the steps you were taking for your character in hard work, in resiliency, in grit, in overcoming setbacks, in courage, finding bravery within yourself, handling that. It was the man. It was what you became in the process. It was more important than the exact moment. And sometimes we lose sight of that. And you think it's the accomplishment that is making you feel this. Then you're going to endlessly chase that accomplishment. It's like a drug. You're going to chase down what is the next big victory that gives me that feeling again, which is a very distorted view. And I believe that's probably a very dangerous view to take. And that probably will lead to psychological collapse for a lot of people, because they won't be getting the fulfillment that they should be getting from just being the right person. Now, if you can make those two align, if you can get yourself to be the right person and then tremendous accomplishment is coming from you being the right person, that's the ultimate. That's the ultimate dream. So you think just a dose of reality, going to the gym and seeing your weight on that scale made you go, okay, time to stop drinking like that. It was just that quick snap back to the reality that helped you like that?
Kind of, yeah. And I've always grown up like insecure about my body. Like I know it comes from like a weird place now, because I'm 6'7", I'm in pretty good shape, like definitely don't look bad, but I'm always gonna have those like childhood things in my head. But yeah, that definitely like snapped me out of it a little bit. And then I don't know, but I understand like an addict's brain, because I've had issues with other substances, and you always do try and trick yourself. Where you're like, oh well, if I just drink half a fifth a day, that's not that much, like you're still making it to work and functioning, but yeah. So
if you're willing to, and you don't have to, you said you went to a psych ward for a period. How did that happen? Why did that happen? Was it self-induced? Was it from people that love you in your life? And then what did you find through that experience? That's because the man that sits across from me today, like I said this to you when you first got here, you're so much lighter, man. You have a better energy radiating out of you. You just seem happier with your life, and there's a lot less major moments going on, but you're mentally in a better place, and it's wonderful to see that. But what led to that moment? Who initiated that moment? What was it like going through that? And then how did you come out of it?
Yeah. So what led to it? I tapered off my drinking, but I thought I could still just, like keep a buzz here and there and be okay. I didn't realize like your body like builds up a residual amount of alcohol and then you do function differently off that. So I figured out if I kept my blood alcohol at like 0.08, I used like very high grade cannabis, and then I used a ton of nicotine. And I was like, oh, well, I don't really need to sleep that much, which is terrible, terrible. Yeah. So I was really working on like different, like my buddy had a fight coming up. So I was like watching film for that and like different, like I was doing a couple of boxing privates at the moment. And so through not sleeping, I triggered myself into like a mental break. You call it like a manic episode. Basically, I've been putting essentially like a fifth of motor oil in my body every day. And then I had all this like unresolved trauma about assuming that all of like my love and my identity I got from like my family and friends and everyone close to me came from sports. So I kind of had that all like crumbling down. And then, so I got to a point where like I was terrified of my family. This was like during the mental break. So I verbally threatened my father and my brother. Never physically did anything. And then I barricaded myself in my brother's house for a day. And then, so.
Can you go back to that frame of mind at all? Like, can you even remember how your brain was controlling you in that moment or the thoughts you were having? Like, because you're so far removed from it now. Like, and you're a very logical man and you went to school and you have a degree in psychology, but you were even a man that's as physically strong as you are and it's been through as much. You ended up in that moment. Can you remember back to like what your brain was saying or how you were being so misled?
Yeah, well, I don't know if you remember, like, I was trying to move here during that time. So, like, I was sending you and Josh, like, 1,000 manic written texts that probably didn't have a lot of context. But when you're going through it, you really think everything's real. So I really thought, like, my family was out to get me. They were trying to keep me here so I didn't better my life. And so, like, I was genuinely afraid of them. And I also had this thought in my brain, like, hey, you've been... I don't want to say like pimped out, but you've kind of been like used as an athlete, and then when time gets hard, like people leave. So there was just kind of a lot of like genuine fear from my family, which looking back on it, like wasn't real. But again, you're in this like manic episode. Everything you think is going on, like you really think is going on. So like when I really barricaded myself, like I thought it was because I was going to be safer and didn't realize I was just acting completely crazy. But so my plan was I was gonna take a nap and then I was gonna go to Pullman that weekend and then fly to Michigan and all my problems would be gone. So I took a nap. This was like on a Thursday night. I guess I was just sleeping. I slept from like 11:30 probably to like 6 or 7 in the morning. And then my brother was at the top of the stairs and he's like, hey, like we called some people in to get you some help. So I was assuming it was like an intervention, So I walk up the stairs and there's 2 nurses in the kitchen. And they're like, hey, you have to come with us. So my brother has like, you like walk up the stairs, you come around and there's like a window. So I look outside and there's 5 cop cars outside. So I was like, oh, that kind of like snapped me out of it. I was like, all right, well, this is real. So I go back downstairs, put a shirt on, go out there. And there's 8 cops in like a semicircle in front of the front door. And again, I thought this was all like, it's weird to explain now because you sound so fucking crazy saying it, but I legitimately thought this was like a whole ruse to get me out of Spokane. Why, I'm not really sure. I thought people I knew were talking to, again, it's very like, you're in a very heightened state of paranoia. So they like handcuffed me, put me in. They took me to Sacred Heart for 3 days so I could like detox in a healthy way, which is it felt like an hour, but it also felt like a year. Like I had no concept of time, whatever they put me on. And then I was at INBH for a week, which is, it's in the Northwest Behavioral Center, behavioral health. It's, yeah, essentially like a psych ward, like, you only see the sun for 30 minutes a day and, nobody has doors. Like a lot of people don't even have curtains to shower with, and it's just yeah, interesting place to.
How does that not make your condition worse? Because
Well, it does.
I was going to say, when you just said that out loud, you're going to take someone in a very fragile state who is struggling to grasp onto reality, who is obviously facing a tremendous amount of stress and anxiety and difficulty, and you're going to put them in a situation that for most people would make things 10 times worse. Like if you take me and you lock me up in a room alone and I can't go out in the world and I have no autonomy anymore and everything, I'm going to be far worse than what I was beforehand. Walk me through that experience. Like you just alluded to, you said it was worse. So then how are you better?
I mean, I didn't really get any better at the psych ward. I mean, it was like a come to realization that I messed up and scared a lot of people, but like I didn't get any better in there. The first 3 days I was there, they were just experimenting different like sleeping medication, different anxiety medication, different like paranoia medication, and oh, this is for depression, and it's like just cycling you on so many different medications.
And you don't have a say in any of this when it's happening, right? Like you're just subject to whatever they decide to give you.
100%. Yeah. Because you're like involuntarily put there. So I was there for 4 days until, I guess I have to back up a little bit. My dog at the time was like the only like living thing that I like had really taken care of in the time. Like I don't have any kids or anything yet. So I was really worried about like where my dog would end up. And I didn't want him to go with my parents because they tend to overfeed animals. So I thought he was with my best friend. So I found out that Thursday. I got into the facility on a Monday. I stayed from a Monday to a Monday. I found out that Thursday that my dog hadn't been with like my best friend at all. He had just been with my family. So that scared me. So they got me like they legally have to give you all of your like documents. So like all of the legal requirements to the place. So I had them print off this like 32-page legal document. I found out that I didn't get to see a judge within this X amount of time. So they had to let me out that Friday, which I messed up on that Friday because I thought I was getting out. And then like I found out I wasn't. So I was really pissed. So like one of the therapists like sat me down and was like, well, what's going on? And like all I've been doing there was like working out. So I was all like breathing hard. And I was like, hey, I could get out of here if I wanted to, right? Like I just said it like dead face to her. I was like, if you guys don't have guns, like I could get out of here. So that put me on like a extended like 48-hour or whatever hold, which I get looking back on it probably wasn't the right thing to say.
But you were telling the truth, man. I mean, at the end of the day, you're literally like, hey, I'm staying here based on me agreeing to follow your rules, but like I can make it out that door and you can't.
Yeah.
It's a darkness. It's dark to say it like that, but it is the truth. You know what I mean? That's not a irrational thought. You're not a 6-year-old child being like, I can beat you up. No, you're like, I can get out of here if you don't take that seriously. Anyway, that's funny. It's funny to me now, but like to them, that was probably horrifying.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're like, you can't make it to the door, like, etc. But anyway, so continue with that part of your story.
So this was on a Friday, so they had to keep me for like another, whatever, basically the weekend. So the only way I could get out or not get out is I would have to see a judge at 12:01 that Monday. So I knew I was getting out that Monday. I had to forfeit my right for a firearm for 6 months, and then they like let me out. So
Was that, speaking to the judge, difficult? Because like you just went through a manic episode, you're in a psych ward for a week long, you come back out, you're going to speak to the judge. Was that difficult to do, or was that like your salvation? That was, you're like, okay, now I just need to show up here and then I'll get a little bit of my freedom and autonomy back and I can go back into the world.
yeah, well, I just knew I had to like not say anything terrible to the judge, and like they had already messed up on their end, so there wasn't really a whole lot the judge could do. So like I knew I was getting out. So I got out that morning. They give you a lift, so I got a lift. I met my parents at the Starbucks. Now, granted, at this time, like they had put me on bipolar medication, which I'm not bipolar. Like I was just going through a hard time, but that medication makes you again just like hyper paranoid and just so like all of the bad stuff like I thought my family was doing, like I still kind of thought was going on. But, I'd just been essentially I'd slept like 20 hours in 10 days. Like I lost 13 pounds while I was in there in a week. Just, like I was in rough shape. So my dad picked me up from the Starbucks and I was like, all right, like my brother said I could stay with him. Like I'll just, like push my bed up against the door. I'll be able to sleep. Like everything will be fine. So walking up to my brother's place, he told me that I couldn't stay there anymore, which I understand. But also when you're, you're that scared and all you want to do is just like, all right, I can sleep. This is awesome. And he also told me all my stuff had been moved from there to my parents' house. Well, I didn't want to stay at my parents because, there's all that stuff going on. So I was basically homeless for like a week, just kind of living in my car. And then that eventually turned into me staying with my family again. But it was, scary, because you're just like, you just got your freedom. But again, you're like, all right, well, I gotta figure out what the hell I'm doing.
Man, so how did the pieces start to come back together? Because that is a tremendously rough part of your story. How do you start to put the pieces back together? Because the man that sits in front of me today, like I said, you're in a better mental state than when I met you the first time. You're lighter, you're happier, you just look like you have the look in your eyes again, like the future can be okay. Mm-hmm. How do you start putting the pieces back together?
Honestly, I think exercising was huge, just coming out of that, because I needed some kind of physical release. So I started coaching boxing immediately after at Hilliard Hammers Box Fit, and then started doing jiu-jitsu a lot more, and just, I don't know, honestly I had so much like alcohol and energy to burn off that I kind of just, but honestly I had to relearn how to sleep, which sounds weird, but if you only see the sun for 30 minutes a day and you're on the kitchen sink of different sleeping meds, you got to learn how to like actually fall asleep naturally. So that took like a month to the point where I wouldn't be up till like, 5 a.m. and sleep for 2 hours and then try and function throughout the day. And
that's the thing, not to interrupt you, but that's the thing that almost pisses me off so bad, where like when you hear about people are giving people bipolar medication or all these other medications, when look at their life, if they are not eating okay, not even great health, I'm not talking about great healthy food, but they're not eating, sleeping, or following any type of routine or structure at all, if their life is that broken, you need to try to fix that stuff first. Versus imagine you have all of this chaos and now I'm going to mess with your neurochemistry by giving you these medications for your brain, which who knows how they'll affect you or how they'll compound the problem or maybe numb some of it. But at the end of the day, you have to fix your sleep schedule. You have to get your body moving again. You have to find loving relationships again. You have to rebuild yourself on an internal level. And it almost seems like you're just adding to the problem with like, hey, on top of all that, you want to take this on too? I just hate how it's done that way. Now, were you able to just get off did you get off the medication quickly and then you went back to putting the other pieces back? Or did you stay on medication while you were putting yourself back in order?
I was on the bipolar medication for like 3-4 months, but it got to a point where it's like, it just wasn't enjoyable to be around people, like we'd be sitting here and I'd be checking the door multiple times, making sure it was locked or making sure I could get to that exit, or what are you doing with your hands, or...
You were in like a hyper paranoid state. Then how is that a medication? That is a worse condition.
I have no idea. I guess people with the actual like bipolar brain chemistry, like it would affect them differently. But with me, it just...
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, was someone not checking in on the symptoms you were having and stuff? Because I would think if you sat down with a licensed professional and you're like, I'm experiencing way more paranoia, I'm anxious all the time, I'm this, that, or the other thing, they'd be like, okay, we either need to change your dose or maybe change the medication. None of that happened.
No, not really. I mean, the people that like prescribed it, I tried to get out of that place as quick as I could. And there was like the inpatient treatment, but it was just... like, hey, you want to go back to this prison for 9 hours a week and try and focus on relearning how to talk? It's like, I can't really do that. So I finally figured out, like, hey, something's wrong. Like, I shouldn't be this paranoid about, like, any social situation. Even got to the point where, like, I'd listen to these podcasts. Have nothing to do with me. And like they wouldn't be enjoyable because I thought that people were making like inside jokes towards me because they knew what was going on in my personal life. Just very erratic stuff.
That just shows you how wild the brain can be. For as powerful as the brain is, and as much as it can help you change your life and it can put you in order, if it gets on the wrong path and it's not brought back to the light, it can be the number one tormentor in your life. You can live in your own prison cell in your mind or create an artificial hell that doesn't really exist based on your thoughts. Your thoughts shape your reality. And if you're experiencing those type of thoughts, you're living in a very dark reality. So how long? Give me a timeline. When was this? It wasn't that long ago, right?
No, it was. I was in there from September 23rd, 2022 to October 3rd. So it was like a total of like 10 or 11 days between the hospital and the...
So this is only about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
So what has happened in the last year and a half that's promoted all the real growth? If you're gonna lay out a path now for someone else that's in a tremendous situation of struggle or darkness or their worst moments of their life, over the course of the last 12 to 14 months, you've rebuilt your life from the ground up, man. How have you done that?
I don't want to say it's delusion, but there has to be a state of like delusion in your mind that like I use physics for a good example, right? Like I want to say it's like Newton's third law: every reaction has an equal or opposite reaction. So you use that in the stem of like your life, right? Like I'm at the lowest of low. Well, if physics is true, then that means there is this potential highest high of high that I can get to. But the only way to get there is to keep going. So a lot of like people underplay the amount that like physical activity does, but if anything, it just gets you out of your head for an hour. Like I try and explain that to people that don't do jiu-jitsu or don't do MMA, and it's like one of the beautiful parts about jiu-jitsu is like I have to focus on just this, you know? It's not like jiu-jitsu and this interaction at work, how's it going with my significant other? And we got an argument about this or that. It's like, nope, I'm just focused on this guy trying to strangle me or break my limbs. And that's it. So finding something like that, like it doesn't necessarily need to be physical. It'll help if it is, and not, I don't want to say victim's mentality, but not staying there. Like it's important to like stay in what you've been in and process it, but like I'm not that person. I'm not the person that's, still has an issue with alcohol. I'm not always depressed. I've been depressed. Like I'm not always suicidal. I've been suicidal. Like I'm not always crazy. Like I fucking was there for a little while, man. But yeah, accepting that there's always gonna be an opposite side of that. Like, for example, like financially, I'm not exactly where I want to be, but I consistently like look down at my wrist. I'm like, all right, well, there's gonna be a Rolex on there eventually, and not because I'm like some bougie guy who needs a Rolex, but it's like the law of attraction. That can be with any terrible part of your life, and the more because like I'm the kind of person like if I'm going through depression, like I'm gonna research everything about it. Like the more you talk to people, like any like great person has been through their version of hell. And it's like if they haven't, then it's pretty noticeable that they're still in it. And so just realizing you're not that special. It's not to sound like shitty or flippant, but you're not. Like everyone goes through their own shit, and you get to choose how you go through it and how you come out on the other end.
I mean, and not to say that you're religious, but you have faith now. Mm-hmm. Like what you were just describing, you have faith that things can work out. Despite all of the things you've gone through, despite the pain, despite the darkness, despite your worst moments, you realize that like that's just a part of having a complete life. You're going to have some incredible highs. You're going to have some horrible lows. And that's what this life is. It's a roller coaster. And like you can hate that, and then it'll make it worse for you that like no matter how good things are going, there's probably some pain around the corner. And no matter how dark things are, if you keep going, there's probably some light around the corner. You're probably going to find things that you didn't know were in your future that are absolutely beautiful, and they're more powerful than you realize. And they're going to hit home, and it's like you just got to keep walking the path. And I think it was crucial what you just said, that you're setting new outlooks for life that are beautiful. You're seeing something before it exists. Whether you want to call that the law of attraction, you're giving yourself something to strive for and something to aim at that helps you move in the direction of that. If you aim low, you tend to hit low. If you aim high, you tend to hit high. And it's not even about whether you hit your goals. It's not that. It's just the progress mentally of saying it can be better than it is right now. And that is worth fighting for. And that's the version of you that the world deserves. Not that you have to cater to the world, but like if you're going to be a father, your son or daughter deserves the most complete, best father that they can have. They don't get to control that, but you do. If you're going to be someone's husband one day, they deserve the best version of you that you can put together, having gone through everything that you did. You know what I mean? And you will be loved and appreciated for that. So it's like you have to have that faith. You have to look forward and say, you know what? I've gone down and that part of the ride sucked. I hate that. I don't want to go through that again. Luckily, you don't have to. You can learn lessons from that period and you get a new experience. But in the end, I think if you live this life correctly, when we're on our deathbed one day, we're going to value the ups and the downs. I can already see it in you now. Some of the worst moments of your life, you found parts of yourself. You found perspectives. You found things that matter. And in a way, they become valuable. They become cherished memories. And you would never think while going through hell that at some point you might value the hell. Mm-hmm. That's how this life works, man. It's beautiful. And it's a message that I would like to tell people that are struggling. And I'm sure you would do the same. Like if you're struggling and you're going through fucking hell, keep going. Because one day you might have found something in those moments that is invaluable, that is priceless, that allows you to be the man that you have the potential of being. So, man, we've shot a full-length feature film, 1.5 hour long dialogue. It's been incredible sitting here and talking to you, Dan, and really hearing parts of your story. I've known from the outside, like, you know, some of your highs and some of your lows, but, like, the reason I do these podcasts, and even if I wasn't making a penny ever, I think I'm going to do these for the rest of my life because it's just great to sit down and realize that, like, we are much more similar than we are different. And if people viewed the world that way and you realize that, like, the person that you are casting out to be, you know, demonized or so different than you, they're probably a lot more like you than you think if you actually just sat down and had deep conversation with them. And we don't do that enough anymore. Everything is soundbite. Everything is on the surface. Everything is... It's too hard to process the depth of you as a human being. So I'd rather just take my preconceived notions, throw them on the version of you and say, oh, he's a football player that drank and this, he must be, which is so far from the truth. And if we start more with a blank canvas when we meet people, we'll find out that their painting and your painting are much more similar than you think. So anything else you'd like to say on the podcast, any message you'd like to say to people that are in difficulty, anything that you'd like to capture in this moment of time, you know, we'll record it, and then we'll wrap this thing up.
Yeah. Well, first off, I want to say thank you. And Josh Parisian is fighting UFC 299. He's about to steal all the hype from a Cuban Olympian Taekwondo attempting to be MMA fighter. So pretty pumped about that. And honestly, I'm grateful to be on here. You know, we talk about rough times. There was a time in the not so distant future that, you know, I didn't know I'd see everybody from Michigan again. And yeah, this has always been a home away from home, so very grateful. Yeah.
Thank you very much, brother. UFC 299, Josh Parisian versus Robelis de Spain. Make sure you're there. Me and Dan are going to be at his back as we see him achieve the biggest moment of his life. And you know what? No matter what, it's a roller coaster. We don't know, will it be a drop or will it be the best moment of his life? We're not sure, but you know what? We're going to be by his side, and like that's what life is meant to be. You're supposed to be there for each other in the good times and in the bad and just enjoy this fucking thing we call life. So thank you very much, Dan. And for anyone that wants to follow Dan, reach out to him. Let's say you were inspired by part of his story. How do they get a hold of you?
Instagram's the best way. Just Spitz DLL. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much, man. And we'll wrap this episode up.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, man.